den absoluten Mindeststandard erfüllt, das ist vollkommen in Ordnung. Also das ist so vollkommen in Ordnung.
Aus der Mitte der Gesellschaft herausspricht und dann eben als solcher diesen bisschen edgy Themen vorträgt. Und ich glaube, so verharrt man heutzutage in so einem Art großen Comedy-Spagat, in dem man alles sagen darf, aber eben auch mit Backlash rechnen muss, wenn man sich womöglich zu weit aus dem Fenster lehnt. Das ist zum Beispiel, würde ich sagen, das Ende des Spektrums, an dem Felix Lobrecht gerade so operiert. Und auf der anderen Seite geht es dann auch mehr denn je drum, einfach echte Menschen auf der Bühne zu sehen, die einem irgendwelche lustigen Beobachtungen aus dem Alltag schildern oder das Ganze zumindest,
Ich dachte wegen den Arbeitsbedingungen in Türkei. Ja, wie gesagt, die sind im Westen besser als im Osten.
So glaubhaft vortragen, dass man denkt, es ist der Alltag, das große Urteil. Also ist deutsche Comedy jetzt wirklich so mies? Nee, natürlich nicht. Beziehungsweise es kommt halt drauf an. Ich bin nach all dem, was wir uns jetzt so erarbeitet haben, mehr denn je der Überzeugung, das deutsche Publikum wurde von Anfang an irgendwie mit dem Gedanken infiziert, dass Stand-up so ein richtig doll krasses Massenmedium ist. Und das kann es sein, versteht mich nicht falsch. Aber allein, dass man dann innerhalb der Comedy ja doch plötzlich anfängt, darüber zu reden, was man jetzt darf und was nicht, zeigt ja an und für sich schon, dass das nicht immer alles für jeden sein kann. Und dadurch, dass es eben in deutschen Medien super lange eigentlich nichts gab zwischen so Nightwash, wo teilweise wirklich einfach Newcomer sind, und dann auf der anderen Seite diesen Comedy-Megastars, die komplett eine Bühne haben, 3 Sendungen moderieren und jede Tour ausverkaufen, sind die Grautöne irgendwie verloren gegangen. Und ich finde erst so über die letzten 10 Jahre, vielleicht sogar noch weniger.
Ich sehe oft, dass Leute Gildern-Stuff umlabeln, kommen die Sachen auch dorthin, Gildern? Das verstehe ich gerade nicht.
Hinweg gab es diese langsame Eingewöhnung daran, dass es eben mehr gibt als Haut drauf Gags im Fußballstadion. Ich glaube auch nach wie vor, das ist immer noch so ein Ding, wenn man in Deutschland so richtig doll groß werden will mit seinem Stand-up, muss man eine gewisse Lautstärke an den Tag legen, Themen in einer gewissen, ich sag mal, Oberflächlichkeit bedienen und vielleicht auch nach wie vor nach Regeln spielen, die eigentlich so in den 90ern und 2000ern etabliert wurden. Aber, und das ist ein ganz großes Aber, Comedy ist mittlerweile nach 30 Jahren in Deutschland so vielfältig geworden, dass es eigentlich völlig wahnwitzig wäre, ein Generalurteil zu fällen. Es gibt so viel mehr Räume, in denen Stand-up und Impro stattfindet, und es gibt so viel mehr Perspektiven, in denen man sich wiederfinden kann. Und das Folgende fühlt sich fast etwas illegal an, das so zu sagen, aber es ist eben was sich erarbeitet werden musste. Denn ja, mittlerweile gibt es migrantische Comedians, bei denen es nicht nur um ihre Herkunft geht und darum, irgendwelche Klischees abzuarbeiten. Es gibt weibliche Comedians und Unterhalterinnen, die sich eben nicht den omnipräsent männlichen Regeln des Geschäfts unterordnen. Es gibt Comedy-Bits, die sowohl politische Haltung als auch nuancierte Lacher bieten und mal unter der Gürtellinie sind. Es gibt sogar, und das ist ja unglaublich, Episoden von Falsch, aber lustig, in denen nur lustige Frauen im Line-Up sind. Und ich schwör's, es fühlt sich absurd an, sowas positiv hervorzuheben. Aber that's the time we live in. Plötzlich gibt es da irgendwie noch so 2 Perspektiven, von denen aus man auf das Ganze blicken
Ich muss anscheinend wirklich mal falsch, aber lustig gucken, to be honest.
kann. Ja, Comedy ist komplizierter oder feinfühliger geworden und die Branche und vielleicht auch Menschen von außen greifen regulierend ein, und das fühlt sich vielleicht komisch an, weil man in der Vergangenheit fast konsequenzlos vor sich hin poltern konnte. Das führt aber wahrscheinlich gleichzeitig dazu, dass sich die Branche diversifiziert, thematisch, aber eben auch, wenn es darum geht, dass es keine reine Wurstparade mehr ist. Und dann gibt es eben das wirklich rein Subjektive. Ich persönlich fand den großen, breiten Mainstream an Comedians in Deutschland eigentlich fast durchgehend immer eher ungeil. Vor 20 Jahren wäre es vielleicht auch irgendwie genau dabei geblieben, weil die Sichtbarmachung von Sachen, die mir vielleicht gefallen hätten, etwas schwieriger war. Aber mittlerweile sollte ja dann doch irgendwie jeder irgendwas finden können, wenn man denn das Verlangen danach hat. Und dann wäre meine doch am Ende des Tages so binäre Antwort darauf, wie schlimm ist Comedy jetzt in Deutschland? Es geht so. Oh, das war keine binäre Antwort. Ich hab's gemerkt. Ich muss Schluss machen, Leute.
Was für ein interessantes Video, Dankeschön. Sehr interessantes Video, muss ich sagen. Da haben wirklich sehr viele Informationen drin gesteckt. Checkt das gerne nochmal aus. Nur fair, nur fair. Dann nochmal ein Abo da lassen. Bitte.
The line of Succession. Returning there would be too risky. Ariake expresses regret at forcing her to recall such painful memories, but Colette assures him that it is fine, as it led to their meeting. She asks to accompany him, and after some thought, Ariake agrees, stating that she may stay as long as she wishes and that, as her rider, it is natural for them to travel together. Colette beams with happiness, expressing her delight at being able to stay by his side. Ariake observes that traveling with such a beautiful dragon girl will make him stand out, causing Colette to squeal in delight and praise him. Ariake offers his hand to Colette, affirming that they will do their best together. Colette agrees enthusiastically, declaring that they are destined to accomplish great things, as her dear dragon knight. Chapter 5 begins with Ariake traveling toward the next town, accompanied by the dragon girl, Colette. To pass the time, Ariake recounts everything that has happened to him so far. Colette becomes angry upon hearing his story, incredulous that his old party would dismiss him despite all he had done for them, as he was the reason they could function as a party in the first place. Ariake tells her to calm down, expressing that he is content simply knowing they can now stand on their own and survive without him. Even the way they sent him off brings a faint smile to his face. Colette wonders why he would smile over such a thing, but Ariake reflects that helping them avoid untimely death is enough to make him happy. Colette comments that he is far too kind and asks if there were any female members in his party. Ariake confirms there were 3, prompting Colette to vow that she will not lose to them and will prove herself. Ariake notes to himself that dragons are truly emotive. Meanwhile, in a tavern after kicking Ariake out, Vivia slams his cup on the table and laughs, recalling how miserable Ariake looked when leaving. Delia agrees and mentions how irritating he had been. Vivia remarks that as long as Ariake is present, there is nothing to worry about. Alicia, staring out the window, muses that a party without a hero can hardly be called a party. Vivia reassures her, while Delia suggests raiding the cursed grotto again now that they have lost a member, presumably Ariake. Palala adds that it would be easier without dead weight. Vivia laughs and calls for Alicia's attention, and she responds, noting that something essential is still missing. Vivia asks if she means an item, but Alicia clarifies that it is something intangible. Back with Ariake and Colette, they arrive at the town of Medicine. Ariake remarks that Alti is still far away, and they decide to stop and rest. Colette admires the town, remarking on its beautiful buildings, and marvels that even after a millennium, old towns can appear brand new. Ariake muses over her summary of 1,000 years in 2 words. As they continue walking, Colette notes the town's prosperity, and Ariake agrees, questioning the reason behind it. He notices her admiring a kitten while also observing the curious stares of the townspeople. Colette then exclaims that something smells delicious nearby and urges them to investigate. Ariake calls her back, agreeing to join but trying not to draw too much attention. They enter a restaurant, and Colette is immediately enthralled by the sight of the food. She grabs a large portion and begins eating enthusiastically, savoring every bite. Ariake, understanding her hunger, takes a more measured approach to eating. Colette chomps on her food with delight, exclaiming how delicious it is, revealing her enormous dragon appetite. The cook observes her voracious eating, complimenting her, while Colette praises the deliciousness of the food. Ariake comments that he would expect the restaurant to have many customers given the quality of the meals. Ariake wonders why all the tables in the restaurant are empty. The cook explains that a devil's grove suddenly appeared near the town. Although the kingdom has dispatch nights, most shops have already closed due to the danger. He admits he is not sure how much longer they can continue operating and warns them to leave before things worsen. Ariake thanks him, while Colette asks what a devil's grove is. Ariake explains that it is essentially a monster nest created by the Demon King. Unlike normal dungeons, monsters can freely leave the grove and cause harm. Devil's Groves progress through 5 phases, with the 5th being catastrophic. If the boss at the end is not swiftly defeated, the grove will expand, and its monsters will grow stronger, which marks the beginning of true danger. Since the townspeople are still present, Ariake assumes the grove is likely only in its first phase. Normally, a hero would be dispatched before things escalate. Still, because it may affect their journey, he wants to investigate further and decides they should visit the Adventurers Guild. Colette becomes excited at the idea, but Ariake reminds her the visit is not for entertainment. After eating, they make their way to the Adventurers Guild. As soon as they enter, they are met with the tense stares of several adventurers. Colette comments on the atmosphere, and Ariake remarks that it is due to the Devil's Grove. They approach the guild staff, and Ariake asks the receptionist a question. The receptionist requests his name, and he identifies himself as Mahama Ariake, a C-rank adventurer, seeking information about the Devil's Grove. The receptionist suddenly reacts in shock upon hearing his name. Adventurers nearby begin murmuring, recognizing him as the man expelled from the hero's party. Colette becomes confused by the sudden commotion. The receptionist hurriedly instructs them to wait and mentions a royal decree, requesting that he not attempt to run away before rushing off. Ariake is surprised to hear of such a decree, while Colette excitedly notes his fame. They overhear someone expressing disbelief about contacting authorities at such a moment. Moments later, a man arrives and inspects him, confirming that he is indeed Ariake. The man identifies himself as Ashim, the guild master, and states that the king has issued a decree regarding Ariake. As a result, Ariake's adventurer license is revoked. Ariake is stunned. Adventurers behind them whisper that he must have committed something severe. Colette growls in anger over how Ariake is being treated. Ariake remarks that he expected his rank might be lowered, but having his license revoked is unexpected. Laughing lightly, he comments that he can no longer take requests or purchase guild resources, pretending to lament the situation. Colette shouts in frustration, unable to believe he sounds pleased. Ariake admits the outcome is far beyond what he expected but shrugs, saying he only joined the guild because he had to. Ashim is taken aback by his attitude. Ariake shifts the topic to the nearby Devil's Grove, noting they will need every bit of help available. He asks why they would revoke his license now. Ashim responds coldly that they have no need for assistance from a rejected outcast of the heroes' party. The Royal Knights have already been dispatched and are more than capable of handling the situation. The surrounding adventurers laugh, mocking Ariake and accusing him of trying to regain his license. Some shout that he is pitiful and a reject, Colette offering to incinerate the other adventurers, while Ariake rejects the idea, knowing it would only bring him more trouble. As he considers the situation, he wonders why the Royal Knights were sent instead of the heroes' party. The heroes' party should have been closer to this town than the knights from the capital. Something must have happened. His thoughts are interrupted when Ashim declares that they have no need for Ariake, insisting that once the knights defeat the dungeon boss, the adventurers will clear out the remains. The surrounding adventurers encourage this sentiment, mocking Ariake and telling him to head home. Colette reacts with hostility, but Ariake, sighing, instructs her to leave as they heard what the adventurers said. Colette protests, but before anything more can be said, the doors burst open. A knight, drenched in blood, staggers inside, leaving bloody handprints on the door before collapsing to their knees. The adventurers watch in shock as the knight, struggling to breathe and speak, announces the devastating news. The siege of the Devil's Grove has failed. A massive horde of monsters is now heading toward the town. The Royal Knights have been annihilated. The adventurers are officially ordered to defend the town immediately, and anyone who attempts to flee will be executed. With those final words, the knight loses consciousness. The room erupts in disbelief and fear. Some refuse to believe the knights were defeated. Others panic at the threat of execution. One adventurer laments that he never signed up for this level of danger. Despair spreads as many question what chance they have if the knights themselves were wiped out. Ariake and Colette move toward the fallen knight. Ariake assesses him and determines that he is unconscious but still alive. It appears the monsters pursued the few surviving knights, driving them toward the town. The adventurers fall deeper into panic. Colette asks whether Ariake could easily defeat the monsters, but Ariake prefers to avoid drawing too much attention. Even so, the situation has clearly exceeded his expectations. Suddenly, Ashim slams his fist onto a table, furious at the chaos. He berates the adventurers for losing their composure, calling their panic disgraceful for those bearing the title of adventurer. He reminds them that fear will not save them, and that inaction will only lead to death. His words steady some of the adventurers, though many remain confused about what to do next, fearing dying for nothing. Watching this, Ariake notes that at least someone is still fulfilling their responsibility. He walks toward Ashim and withdraws all the coins he has. Ashim demands to know what he's doing, but Ariake places the pouch on the table and tells him to leave this task to him. Chapter 6 begins the moment after Ariake makes his declaration. Ashim reacts with disbelief, questioning how Ariake expects to handle an approaching monster horde by himself. Ariake brushes aside the panic, and instead asks what the official reward is for dealing with the monster cleanup. Ashim, irritated, snaps that this is not the time to worry about such things and explains that the reward is only a single gold coin, far too little to risk one's life for. Ariake agrees, prompting Colette to ask what he is trying to do. Ariake climbs onto a desk and points out that no one would risk their necks for such a meager reward. Ignoring Ashim's frustrated questions, he surveys the room, counting the number of adventurers present and concluding that there are enough for what he has in mind. The adventurers murmur among themselves, confused and skeptical about what he is doing. Ariake then lifts his pouch, heavy with coins, and tips it over. The coins spill across the floor with sharp clinks, drawing everyone's attention. He then announces boldly that he will personally reward anyone who fights to the very end, offering 100 gold coins per adventurer. The room erupts in shock. Many struggle to believe what they just heard. Ariake formally declares it to be a contract under royal law, an unbreakable agreement, one that binds both sides like a curse. The adventurers recoil again in astonishment at the gravity of such a contract. The shock soon gives way to excitement. One adventurer calculates that 100 gold coins could provide for his family for an entire year. Another imagines finally repairing his home. Ariake drives his message further, reminding them that 100 gold coins could give them nearly anything they desire. With the royal army defeated, they alone can defend the town. He challenges them not to allow monsters to destroy the peace they have built. They are adventurers, he proclaims, and now is the moment to risk their lives for an extraordinary reward and to protect their home. As his speech ends, the adventurers grow silent, weighing his words. Then resolve begins to stir among them. One, moved by the reminder of his hometown, declares that he cannot abandon the place where he was born and raised. Another shouts agreement, vowing not to let monsters ravage their town. More voices join, declaring determination fueled both by duty and by the promise of gold. With nowhere to run and everything on the line, they commit themselves to the fight, some dreaming of returning home wealthy if they survive. The adventurers, now fully energized, erupt into cheers and determination. They affirm that they will do this, that they will stand their ground, and that the monsters will not break through. Ashim, seeing their morale restored, orders them to prepare. The adventurers echo the command with unified voices and begin making ready, checking weapons, gathering potions, and steeling themselves for the battle ahead. A woman reports to Ashim that all the healing potions have been gathered. Ashim responds that once everything is ready, they will join the vanguard. As he turns, Ariake approaches and asks if preparations are going well. Ashim steps toward him and expresses his gratitude, admitting that none of this would have been possible without Ariake. He praises Ariake's speech, and Ariake acknowledges the compliment. Ashim remarks that with Ariake being only C rank, and with his license revoked, he had assumed no one would listen to him. Yet now Ariake appears almost awe-inspiring. Ashim wonders aloud if Ariake is truly the incompetent person rumors describe. Colette immediately reacts with hostility, scolding the guild master for suggesting such a thing. She reminds him that he also insulted Ariake earlier, calling him a money-hungry brute. Ashim panics and says he regrets his earlier remarks, but Ariake stops Colette, pointing out that he himself willingly offered the money. Colette growls, but Ariake explains that his plan worked because people cannot survive without money, and those in power have a responsibility to compensate them properly. Expecting them to risk their lives for a single gold coin is absurd. Colette beams and praises Ariake's reasoning. Ashim then asks how Ariake obtained so much money in the first place. Ariake replies that he simply saved it. Ashim shouts in disbelief at the amount, but Ariake reminds him that the hero's party regularly undertakes high-ranking quests. Ashim considers this and admits it makes sense. Even so, he questions why Ariake is helping a town he has no personal connection to. Ariake asks if Ashim knows the restaurant with the green roof nearby. Ashim says he does. Ariake explains that they serve excellent shellfish pasta, and it would be a shame if he could never eat it again. Ashim laughs and agrees that such a loss would be terrible. He promises that if they make it back alive, he will use the reward money to treat Ariake. Ariake groans as Ashim slaps him hard on the back, pointing out that the money in question belongs to him. After some time, a woman calls out to Ashim that everything is ready. Ashim says he is on his way. He then stands before all the assembled adventurers and addresses them. He explains that the town of Medaisen is protected only by fences and ditches, making the adventurers the final line of defense. If they fall, the town will fall with them. The plan is straightforward. Defenders will hold the front line while mages provide support from the rear. Although the knight's failure may make victory seem impossible, they must win and return home alive. The adventurers respond with a loud cheer. Nearby, Colette observes the gathered adventurers and remarks on their enthusiasm, though she worries whether they can survive. Judging by the tremors, she estimates around 1,000 monsters approaching. With only 100 adventurers moving out, she doubts they stand a chance. Ariake admits the situation will be difficult. Colette asks if he intends to eliminate the monsters himself, but Ariake explains that having a savior solve everything for them would not help in the long term. Without gaining confidence through their own efforts, the people of Medaisen will never be able to protect their town in the future. This is why he is approaching the problem this way. They must work together to claim victory. Colette asks if he would really do that for them. Suddenly, she notices a signal flare in the sky and announces that the battle has begun. Ariake says it is time for them to go. Colette hesitates, but Ariake clarifies that although the people of Medicine must win through their own strength, he still intends to support them. Helping to that extent should be acceptable. Out in the open fields, 4 kilometers north of Medicine, the adventurers are already engaged in combat against the monsters. On the battlefield, Asham calls out orders, urging his fighters to push forward and attack the center where the enemy numbers are thinner. Amid the chaos, a goblin leaps toward an injured adventurer, but Asham swiftly moves in and kills it, earning the injured man's gratitude. Asham orders the adventurers with less than a third of their health remaining to retreat, and demands that the support units hurry and cast strengthening magic on the attackers. Another explosion erupts in the distance, and he questions whether the Neagle brothers are positioned in that direction, wondering what they are doing. At the Neagle brothers' location, the man with the mohawk slams his fist into the ground, sending a shockwave that blasts several monsters backward. His long-haired brother cuts down enemies one after another as more monsters surge in from all sides. Surrounded, the mohawked man curses the relentless advance, while the long-haired brother warns him that one of their healers has run out of mana again. The mohawked fighter reacts with frustration. A monster suddenly slashes across the mohawked man's shoulder, causing his brother to shout out in alarm. The wounded man urges his brother to stay focused, reminding him that the enemies are still coming. The long-haired brother blocks another monster's strike, trying to protect them both. The mohawked man yells at the adventurers nearby, demanding to know why they are hesitating. He urges them to attack, warning that if they fall at this point, the town will be lost. He commands them to fight with everything they have. In the midst of the chaotic battle between the monsters and the adventurers of Medicine, one adventurer rushes to Asham to report that a third of the left flank has collapsed, and the Neagle brothers have taken severe injuries as well. Asham reacts with frustration and urgently orders the remaining stock of healing potions to be distributed, insisting that the line must not be breached. Another adventurer arrives to report that the right flank is requesting reinforcements because a caterpillar dragon has appeared. They estimate that it will take at least 3 A-rank adventurers to handle it. Asham shouts back in anger, asking whether they truly believe he has spare manpower to send. He orders the right flank to handle the threat themselves, explaining that the center is barely holding and they, too, are being overwhelmed. Yet another adventurer calls for him, and Asham demands to know what the issue is this time. The adventurer points ahead in terror, struggling to speak. Asham looks toward the direction indicated, his eyes widening as an ogre king emerges. One of the adventurers cries out in horror, recognizing it as an S-rank monster. The ogre king inhales deeply. Asham instantly orders everyone to run, but the monster unleashes a roar that sends a wave of force across the battlefield, causing all the adventurers to collapse where they stand, paralyzed. Asham, struggling against the pressure, curses his immobile body and desperately calls for any healers or anyone still capable of movement. Monsters growl and laugh as they advance on the helpless defenders. One monster lunges toward an elf adventurer. She squeezes her eyes shut, bracing for death. But a spray of blood bursts outward, and the monster's head drops to the ground. Ariake has appeared, positioning himself between the elf and the threat. The elf stares at the cape fluttering behind him. Her eyes widen and she tries to speak, but Ariake, analyzing the battlefield, identifies the Ogre King's ability as Conquer, a skill that paralyzes ordinary adventurers. He checks whether the elf is injured. The elf manages to thank him and explains that, as an elf, her resistance allows her to, before Colette suddenly interjects, expressing relief that the elf is unharmed. Asham calls out to Ariake. Ariake turns toward him and casually remarks that Asham is holding up better than expected. Asham snaps back, demanding to know why Ariake is on the front lines at all, insisting that a C-rank adventurer like him will get himself killed. Ariake responds that this entire operation was his request, and because of that, he bears the responsibility of ensuring the mission succeeds. Chapter 7 opens with Ariake rallying the adventurers, urging them to continue fighting as the battle is far from over. He triggers his skill, enhancing the psychic resistance of everyone on their side. The adventurers immediately feel the effect, lightness spreading through their bodies and the numbness caused by the Ogre King's skill dissipating. Ariake confirms that this counters the Ogre King's ability, Conquer, and he calls for Colette. Colette bursts forward and leaps high into the air. Gathering her breath, she unleashes a massive fireball that plummets into the enemy ranks, annihilating the monsters instantly. She lands smoothly, drawing astonished reactions from the others, and Ariake remarks that her power remains formidable. Asham attempts to rise, recognizing that Colette's attack has bought them a momentary reprieve, but the overwhelming enemy force continues to advance. Ariake halts him and explains their tactical disadvantage. They lack defensive strength, and the monsters outnumber them 10-1. Winning under these conditions would require a miracle. Though Asham begins to protest, Ariake states that the real problem lies in the difference in numbers, and reveals his plan. He will use a skill to multiply their party's status by 10. He also intends to reduce the enemy's stats to 1/10 of their original levels, a combination he believes will completely shift the battle in their favor. Asham cannot believe such a feat is possible or that any skill could affect an entire horde, but Ariake insists that it can be done and urges everyone to focus solely on victory. Steeling himself, Ariake silently activates his passive skill, Party-Wide Net, extending its effects to all adventurers within range. Asham reminds Ariake that there are 100 adventurers present, and Ariake acknowledges this as he begins with a skill that reduces incoming damage, ensuring their overall safety. Asham feels his skin harden, though he notes that this alone is far from a tenfold improvement. Ariake responds by continuing the sequence of enhancements. He activates agility to increase everyone's speed, then boosts evasion, causing the adventurers to feel exceptionally light on their feet. Ariake proceeds with a 4th buff, a divine blessing that frequently nullifies incoming damage. The 5th buff heightens the chance of enemy attacks missing. Cheers rise from the adventurers as each new enhancement empowers them further, some marveling at their sudden strength and the advantage it grants them. But Ariake does not stop. He applies a 6th buff, damage ratio down, prompting shocked reactions from those watching. The 7th buff increases resistance to abnormal status effects, leading Asham to cry out in exasperation at how invulnerable Ariake seems intent on making them. Ariake pushes on, casting the 8th buff, attack power increase, followed by the 9th, an increase in attack ratio. The 10th adds a poison effect to their strike. The 11th restores their status when attacking. The 12th recovers stamina upon landing hit. The 13th enhances magic resistance. The 14th raises magical power. The 15th boosts the ratio of magical attack. The 16th grants passive HP and MP regeneration. The 17th negates instant death. The 18th provides a shred of hope. The 19th increases critical hit rate, and the 20th boosts it yet again. The adventurers count 20 buffs in disbelief. Ariake considers debuffing the enemy next, but finds the list too long, so he simply reverses the effects of his buffs onto the monsters. The adventurers silently judge him for this shortcut. Suddenly, a shout rises as the enemy charges again. Many are surprised by the quick recovery of the monsters, questioning whether the enhancements truly function as intended. An elf steps forward, ignoring warnings, and effortlessly cleaves through the monsters, astonished by her own newfound strength. Others quickly realize that the battle, previously slipping from their grasp, has suddenly become overwhelmingly easy. Asham swings his axe with unexpected ease, marveling at how light it feels in his hands. He observes that while most people can only handle 3 buffs at once, Ariake has managed to stack 20. Ariake casually notes that he used to do this regularly while serving in the hero's party. The adventurers are stunned to learn this, and Ariake adds that if minor buffs were included, the total would be even higher. Complaints erupt among the adventurers, who realize they fought alongside the hero's party under these conditions. Some wonder if the hero's party reached its heights solely because of Ariake. Colette bursts out in frustration, insisting that he supported them for years, only to be cast aside to alerts her to his movement. Colette launches forward with excitement as the two rush toward the Ogre King. The Ogre King swings his massive hand toward a cluster of adventurers, forcing Ariake to react as he realizes where the attack is directed. The impact creates a thunderous explosion as the Ogre King's hand collides with Colette, who endures the blow while expressing her irritation at having to protect humans. Ariake instructs an adventurer to leave the Ogre King to him and Colette and to focus on handling the remaining monsters. Colette announces her own title boldly, though Ariake objects to her imposing such demands on the adventurers. The Ogre King increases the pressure of his grip, causing Colette's body to tremble under the strain, but she pushes off and escapes. The Ogre King exhales sharply once more, drawing Ariake's annoyance, and Colette agrees. She leaps into the air and strikes the Ogre King in the face, telling it to silence itself. While Colette distracts and engages the Ogre King directly, Ariake concentrates, his eyes flashing as he invokes a rapid sequence of spells. Partial reinforcement, limb destruction, paralysis, enhanced musculature, armor penetration, binding, increased attack power, and heightened critical damage. With the spells complete, he delivers a powerful kick to the Ogre King's legs. The blow destabilizes the massive creature, sending it crashing to the ground. Adventurers gasp in awe at how easily the pair has toppled such a towering foe, and Colette shouts her admiration for Ariake's skills. But the moment is cut short as the Ogre King suddenly seizes Colette and hurls her to the ground with brute force. Ariake cries out for her, realizing the situation has taken a dangerous turn. Ashim panics, assuming Colette faces death, but Ariake clarifies that his concern lies elsewhere. Ashim, confused, asks what he means. Their attention shifts as Colette rises to her feet, furious and unbroken. She declares that she will not allow the Ogre King to escape alive and vows to demonstrate her true strength to Ariake. Ariake accepts her resolve, reminding her that he is her Dragon Knight, and together they will reveal the full extent of their power. Chapter 8 opens with Ashim cutting down a monster, clearing out the remaining small enemies. An adventurer reports that both flanks have successfully cleared their sectors. Ashim orders the news relayed to the central forces, then turns toward Ariake to announce that their side is finished. All that remains is the Ogre King. Before he can say more, the Ogre King releases a powerful huff, followed by a thunderous roar that echoes across the battlefield. The adventurers brace as the familiar force rattles them, and Ashim curses as the disruptive effect washes over them again. Ariake and Colette stand firm. Colette dismisses the Ogre King's display as its only trick and urges that they bring the fight to an end. Ariake, however, remains cautious. Though Colette is undeniably strong, her curse was only recently lifted. While he is relieved she now bears the title of Celestial Dragon, he knows that does not guarantee her full power has awakened. He also worries about the potential dangers her abilities could pose to her own body. Ariake casts a full suite of buffs onto her: Ogre Exploit, increased attack power, Focus, Monster Exploit, enhanced critical rate, binding effects, and a mark for certain demise. Colette reacts in frustration at the sheer number of enchantments, questioning whether Ariake doubts her capabilities. Ariake admits that old habits linger, particularly his tendency to be excessively protective of her. Colette responds with a confident smirk, declaring that if this is how he expresses affection, then it only strengthens her resolve. Ariake shields his eyes as an overwhelming surge of power erupts from Colette. He senses something deep and resonant awakening within her, a force welling up from her core. Dragons with a rider are capable of drawing on the strength of their Dragon Knight, enabling them to reach their true potential. Ariake encourages Colette to use his power freely if she truly is a celestial dragon, activating the skill Final Gambit. A flash of blinding light bursts from Colette's body as she transforms, revealing her true form, the Jespant God Dragon. The watching adventurers freeze in shock, their eyes wide and their mouths falling open as Colette's massive dragon form looms before them. Inside Ariake's thoughts, he reflects on the nature of Final Gambit. Though the skill affects only the chosen target, it temporarily restores the being's innate abilities. He had anticipated that the skill would allow Colette to access her true powers without suffering adverse effects. Yet the reality of witnessing such a transformation is far more overwhelming than he imagined. For the first time, he beholds what it truly means to be a celestial dragon. Colette issues a thunderous roar, declaring judgment against the Ogre King by the combined authority of herself and her Dragon Knight, Nahama Ariake. A tornado forms in the sky above as Colette summons her power, calling forth her inferno, Final Fury. A concentrated beam of blazing light erupts from her mouth and shoots toward the Ogre King. Upon striking its target, the blast unleashes a massive shockwave of air and magic that sweeps across the battlefield. Adventurers, and even Ariake, shield their eyes as the blinding radiance surges outward. Colette's beam of light strikes the Ogre King directly. The adventurers stare in disbelief, realizing the Ogre King has been completely disintegrated. Ariake looks upward just as a final flash of light appears in the sky, signaling Colette's return to her human form. She begins to fall, but Ariake catches her before she hits the ground. He acknowledges her efforts, and Colette, exhilarated, revels in the overwhelming sensation of the power she unleashed. The adventurers watch them, awestruck, realizing they have just witnessed the way true heroes fight. Even Ashim, now seated on the ground from exhaustion, asks whether the battle is truly over. Ariake confirms that the boss has been defeated and that the Devil's Grove has officially been cleared. A flare suddenly erupts in the distant sky, a signal from the Central Forces indicating their success in eliminating the remaining monsters. The adventurers erupt in shock and celebration, calling it a miracle. Ariake disagrees, declaring that their victory was not born of miracle or fate. These monsters had once defeated the kingdom's knights, yet the adventurers courageously stood against them, fighting to protect their town. They risked their lives, faced overwhelming numbers, and triumphed. The victory belonged to everyone present. With that, Ariake leads them back home. When they return to the town of Medicine, a villager announces the triumphant arrival of the heroes. The townspeople cheer and welcome the adventurers back. Ariake and Colette watch as Ashim reunites with his family, smiling at the heartwarming scene. A few days later, an adventurer reacts in shock upon learning that Ariake is already preparing to leave. Ariake explains that they have rested long enough. The adventurer insists they still owe him greatly. Remembering the intensely overwhelming hospitality of the past days, Ariake admits privately that he simply cannot endure any more of it. Ashim arrives and tells the adventurers to show respect and allow Ariake to depart. Ariake expresses his gratitude to Ashim. Ashim kneels before him, apologizing for his earlier rude behavior and sharing that he has already appealed to the kingdom to revoke Ariake's license revocation. Ariake tries to downplay it, flustered, and urges Ashim to stop being so formal. Ashim laughs, agrees, and offers his hand, telling Ariake he is always welcome to return, and that he'll treat him to that pasta again. Ariake smiles, accepting both the gesture and the invitation. Ashim bids him safety and invokes the grace of Shingret upon him. The villagers wave as Ariake and Colette depart by carriage. After some time on the road, Colette excitedly talks about her celestial dragon form, marveling at the immense power she was able to draw out, even if only briefly. With their new carriage, she asks where they are headed next. Ariake explains that their next stop is Olden Town, as he received a letter making it a convenient destination. Colette senses something bothers him. Ariake notes that their path will take them through the Forest of Abundance, which is home to elves. Colette reacts with fascination, saying she has heard elves are difficult to please. Ariake explains that while it depends on the individual, they are generally known to be hard to approach. Colette confidently assures him not to worry. If elves challenge him, she will burn them, and even the entire forest, if necessary. Ariake cautions her that just because she can burn everything does not mean she should, and reminds her she must consider options that do not involve incineration. He briefly wonders whether he is thinking too much, but another concern returns to him. Why hadn't Vivia and the others been summoned to deal with the Devil's Grove? They were closer. No matter how much he investigated, he found no answers. He worries he may simply be overthinking. His thoughts are abruptly halted when Colette stuffs bread into his mouth, insisting that this is not the time to worry. They should eat to their fill and take things easy. Ariake eats the bread and concedes that she is right. He reassures himself that there is nothing to worry about. Everything will be fine. Meanwhile, deep inside the cursed dungeon, blood drips down Vivia's face. He curses, unable to comprehend the situation. As the hero, he questions why this is happening to them. They are on the verge of being annihilated. Panic rises as he demands to know how such a monster could possibly be there. Chapter 9 opens with Vivia and his party running through the interior of a dungeon. Vivia urges the group to move faster. Delia, out of breath, struggles to keep pace. Elga tries to inform Vivia that Palala and Alicia have fallen behind, but Vivia dismisses the concern and orders everyone to continue running before they are overtaken. A massive snake suddenly appears behind them and lunges toward Vivia. He narrowly evades the attack but slams into a wall. Elga steps in front of him with his shield raised. The monster roars and slams its tail against Elga's shield with tremendous force. Vivia berates him to stand firm, reminding him that he is supposed to serve as their shield. Elga trembles, insisting this is how he always fights. Vivia curses internally, frustrated that he has exhausted both his potions and MP. This dungeon was supposed to be trivial. He questions why such misfortune would occur to someone of his status, an S-rank hero. The narrative shifts back to several hours earlier at the Cursed Grotto. Vivia had declared that reaching the 50th floor would serve as a suitable warm-up. Elga agreed, noting how many times they had completed it before. Delia added that even a C-rank adventurer could reach the 50th floor. Palala expressed confidence that, with an S-rank hero leading them, the task would be effortless. Alicia, however, questioned whether they had prepared enough supplies, voicing concern that they might require additional items. Vivia dismissed the notion as unnecessary for such a low-level dungeon. Alicia attempted to warn that, without Ariake accompanying them anymore, caution might be appropriate. Vivia cut her off, accusing her of worrying excessively. Palala joined in, claiming that they were better off without Ariake, whom she called useless, and hinted that Alicia simply wanted to rely on items instead of proper support magic. Alicia quietly denied the accusation. Palala criticized her further, prompting Vivia to intervene and direct the group onward. He reminded Palala she would be responsible for illuminating the dungeon now that Ariake was gone. Palala complained that losing their errand boy caused inconveniences, but Vivia assured her the task should be simple for someone of her caliber. Palala blushed at the compliment. Vivia remarked that exploring without Ariake would be enjoyable, and Delia strongly agreed. Vivia pulled Delia close and told her he was counting on her as well, to which she eagerly affirmed. Vivia privately enjoyed how easily the affection-struck girls responded to him, noting Alicia as the only one who remained difficult to influence, yet confident that she too would eventually fall for him. As the chosen hero destined to save the world, he imagined receiving the princess's hand in marriage after defeating the Demon King, then ascending to rule the kingdom and its people. With enthusiasm, he signaled the group onward, promising they could enjoy good alcohol once the exploration was complete. Alicia quietly resigned herself, believing the situation to be unavoidable despite her attempts to caution them. As they proceeded into the Cursed Grotto, a bat flew overhead. Vivia attributed the disturbance to the creature. Palala jumped in fright. Vivia then complained about the darkness, insisting that visibility was too poor to notice approaching enemies. Palala pleaded that she was unable to produce any more light than she already had. Vivia exploded in disbelief, comparing her unfavorably to Ariake, who could illuminate the entire dungeon with ease. Palala attempted to respond, but Alicia clarified that only Ariake possessed such ability. Vivia reacted with surprise. Alicia explains that dungeons function like the interiors of living organisms. Unlike ordinary structures, they overflow with their own magic, causing any external magic from adventurers like themselves to be heavily suppressed. She reminds them that Ariake had already mentioned this. Vivia reacts with irritation, scoffing at the idea that he should be expected to remember every minor comment Ariake ever made. A monster suddenly lunges toward Vivia, but Delia intercepts it with a swift punch that sends it flying. She urges the group to stop discussing Ariake and focus on moving forward. Before they can proceed, the monster rises again. Elga quickly interposes his shield to protect Delia, who is astonished it survived. Vivia grows alarmed, questioning why the creature is still alive when a single strike would normally be enough to defeat it. Delia channels magic into her fists, leaps into the air, and delivers a flurry of blows until the monster collapses. Panting, she asks if it is over, and Vivia checks for confirmation. Elga verifies that the monster is indeed dead. Delia wonders why it didn't fall from her first attack. Elga adds that the strength of its strikes seemed higher than usual. Vivia dismisses the concern, blaming their difficulties on the lack of proper visibility in the dungeon. He criticizes Palala for failing to provide adequate illumination despite calling herself a great mage, causing her to flinch. Elga advises him not to speak to her that way. Vivia realizes his mistake and offers a half-hearted apology, acknowledging that Palala is trying her best. He reassures the group that they can at least see the path ahead, so they should keep moving. Delia, encouraged, praises him enthusiastically. Vivia affirms that everyone is simply adjusting to their new roles, but asserts that as the chosen hero, the situation will remain manageable. Elga supports him, and Vivia apologizes once more to Palala, who tells him she was simply scared. Vivia then declares that, now that they have settled down, they will proceed. Alicia questions whether they will truly be all right under these conditions, pointing out that they are unaccustomed to fighting in such darkness and suggesting that it might be best to retreat and reconsider their strategy. Vivia responds angrily to the idea of withdrawing. Delia immediately scolds Alicia, accusing her of trying to dictate orders to their hero. Vivia intervenes, telling Delia it is fine, and rationalizes Alicia's concern as simple overcautiousness. He insists that retreating would expose them to even greater danger, so they will advance instead. As the hero, this is his command. Alicia falls silent. Delia and Palala praise Vivia, reinforcing his confidence. He scoffs and reminds them of his superiority before turning to Alicia to ensure she understands, only to realize she has already turned away. Irritated, he curses inwardly, resentful that she first attempted to challenge his decisions and now dares to ignore him. He suspects she is looking down on him. The thought of withdrawing from a C-rank dungeon infuriates him. Such an act would ruin not only his reputation among the public but also his standing with the kingdom. He convinces himself that the fault lies with Palala for their current predicament, claiming no responsibility. Delia and Elga, he believes, were too slow, forcing him to take charge. As he continues forward, he suddenly notices something unsettling and asks Delia if they have passed the same location before. The implication dawns on him: they may be lost. Vivia had questioned whether they were lost. Delia admitted that the darkness made it impossible for her to see their path. Vivia grew frustrated, demanding to know how they could have gotten lost even with a map, especially after having traversed this dungeon numerous times in the past. Ariake had been able to guide them flawlessly on their very first visit. Alicia explained that Ariake had simply been exceptional. He navigated by constantly correcting an incomplete map. But even with a fully completed one, they were essentially stumbling blindly in such darkness. She reminded them that they needed to proceed with greater caution. Alicia then pointed out a marking on the wall, one Ariake had left for them previously. According to that mark, there should be a stairwell descending to the next floor just around the corner. Vivia scoffed at the reminder and yelled that she should have mentioned this earlier. He insisted they move on immediately. Alicia questioned whether they were truly prepared. This was only the 25th floor, merely halfway to their intended destination, and they were already having difficulty because of the darkness. Ariake would have advised a retreat. She asked if continuing to push the party forward in their condition was a wise choice. Vivia angrily retorted that they had already come this far, so why was she raising objections now? Alicia responded that she simply wished to be cautious, since enemies would only become stronger as they descended. Vivia dismissed her concerns, insisting it was merely a matter of adjusting to their new team composition. Yet she continued to bring up Ariake, which irritated him even more. He insisted they hurry to the next floor. Suddenly, a thick and oppressive presence enveloped the area, causing all of them to freeze as it swallowed the entire space. Delia trembled, overwhelmed by the horrifying sensation. Palala panicked, claiming that the presence must belong to a boss monster. Vivia denied the possibility. No boss should appear at this level. Alicia stated quietly that the creature was approaching. Delia's voice shook with disbelief. Vivia ordered them to prepare for combat, but Palala struggled to remain standing. They held still as the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the darkness. A skeleton carrying a sword stepped into view. Vivia paused, baffled at first, then exhaled in relief. It was merely a skeleton knight. He claimed that if they had remained calm, they would not have been startled by such a creature. A basic monster from a C-rank dungeon had managed to frighten them, yet it posed no threat whatsoever to an S-rank hero. Confidently, he struck down the skeleton knight with a single blow. Palala cheered excitedly, praising him. Vivia laughed triumphantly, boasting about his own strength. But mid-sentence he abruptly stopped, feeling an impact in his abdomen. When he looked down, he saw blood spreading across his torso. The others stood frozen as blood dripped steadily from his body. Confused, Vivia wondered why the monster was still alive. His attack should have killed it instantly. How had it managed to counterattack? And why was there a gaping hole in his stomach? He coughed blood, panic rising in his voice as the reality sank in. The situation made no sense. With terror and disbelief overtaking him, he screamed in denial. Chapter 10 begins with Vivia bleeding heavily as the skeleton knight's sword remains buried in his abdomen. The pain is so severe that he cannot move. The skeleton knight then yanks its blade free, raising it again to strike Vivia a second time. Elga rushes forward, shouting for Vivia to avoid the attack, but the skeleton knight slips away with unnerving speed, as if mocking them. Elga curses its agility. Vivia realizes that Elga saved him, but he cannot comprehend how Elga missed such an obvious strike. Delia, horrified, trembles as she observes that the monster not only wounded Vivia but also evaded Elga's attack, something skeleton knights were never capable of doing. Palala, equally panicked, insists that skeleton knights should not be this powerful. They were low-tier monsters normally defeated by adventurers around level 20. Their party had always dispatched them with ease. Elga braces himself as the skeleton knight launches another attack. He intercepts its sword with his own, but his arms shake as the creature forces its blade forward with overwhelming strength. Vivia yells at him in frustration, demanding to know why he cannot simply push it back and questioning the worth of all his strength. Straining under the pressure, Elga retorts angrily, reminding Vivia that despite all his boasting, he was the first one to fall. So how could he act so superior? Their shouting escalates. Delia interrupts, insisting they are obstructing her. She leaps in and unleashes her so-called unblockable finishing blow. But the skeleton knight stops her attack effortlessly. Shocked, Delia stares at it in disbelief. The monster then lifts her with its force and blasts her with a surge of magic. She is hurled violently into a wall and cries out in agony. Elga calls out to her with alarm, but she does not respond. Elga, horrified, realizes that a single hit from such a low-level monster inflicted catastrophic damage. Palala, voice shaking, questions why they are all suddenly so weak. Vivia agrees and demands that she cast support magic immediately. Palala cries out that she is already using her strongest buffs, enhancing both their attack and defense to their maximum. Their stats should be exactly the same as usual. Vivia struggles to process this. If these truly were their best conditions, then something is terribly wrong. At that moment, the skeleton knight cuts down Elga, sending him crashing to the ground. Vivia stares in disbelief, refusing to accept what he is seeing. As an S-rank hero, he should never be overwhelmed by such a supposedly weak monster. Yet his party is being destroyed effortlessly. Panic rises in him as he screams, unable to comprehend why any of this is happening. In the midst of the chaos, Alicia activates her healing skill, Area Heal, known as the Angel's Breath. The injured party members begin to glow as Alicia's healing skill takes effect. Alicia approaches Vivia, stating that his confusion about their situation has an obvious answer. All of this is happening because Ariake is no longer with them. Vivia, shocked and furious, protests. He rejects the idea immediately, insisting Ariake had only ever stood behind them passively. He declares none of their current misfortune is related to Ariake. As a skeleton knight charges toward them, Alicia splashes it with holy water, immobilizing it. She explains that holy water paralyzes undead monsters. Then, addressing Vivia's ignorance, she elaborates further. Ariake's backup skill was the reason their attack, defense, and buffs had always been so powerful. With his support, even an ordinary adventurer could reach A-rank capability. Vivia denies it desperately, yelling that his strength was achieved by his own merit. Alicia continues, saying that Vivia had always ignored Ariake's advice and responded only with insult. But whether he believes it or not, Ariake would not be bothered by such triviality. Enraged, Vivia reacts, but Alicia coughs and asks if everyone can now stand. She announces that they must alter their strategy. Without Ariake, they cannot continue. Although withdrawing will be difficult, it is the only path that avoids certain death. A cold shiver runs through all of them at her words. Alicia states that they are retreating from the dungeon. Hours later, Vivia collapses to his knees, exhausted. They have only managed to return to the 15th floor. Breathlessly, he demands more healing from Alicia. Alicia confirms that she can heal them, but warns that wasting her MP would be unwise, as fully restoring everyone would consume a great deal of energy. Vivia suggests using potions instead, but Alicia informs him that only a few remain. Vivia orders Palala to hand over one of her potions. Palala refuses, saying she has barely any left and must conserve them because she also uses magic. Vivia accuses her of not having used magic at all. Palala defends herself, saying she has been conserving it as a precaution, since her MP exceeds 10,000. Vivia turns to Alicia, asking whether Palala is telling the truth. Palala protests loudly, demanding why her MP should be questioned. Alicia sighs and explains that since confirming combat readiness is necessary, she can say Palala's MP is nearly depleted. Palala is stunned. She tries to argue, but Alicia cuts her off, pointing out the diminishing brightness of Palala's light spell. Delia comments that their surroundings indeed appear darker than before. Vivia addresses Palala again. Palala insists the darkness is normal because she has been using her magic properly. Alicia asks if Palala now understands. Her supposed 10,000 MP was only possible thanks to Ariake's backup skill. Palala rejects the claim, calling it a lie. Alicia explains that Palala, too, failed to heed Ariake's words. Palala laughs in disbelief, accusing Alicia of lying out of spite. She grabs Alicia by the neck, yelling that Alicia is only acting superior because she had scolded Palala in the past. Elga tries to intervene. Alicia replies that her strength came from Ariaki's support, therefore, the true arrogance lies in Palala's attitude. Palala snaps and swings her fist at Alicia, shouting angrily as Elga calls for her to stop. Suddenly, a suffocating black aura engulfs the area. A booming voice commands silence, outraged that mere insects have disturbed its slumber. Vivia freezes, declaring that this cannot be happening. Realizing what the presence is, he cries out in horror. Fenrir, a monster from the 99th floor, has appeared before them. Chapter 11.1 opens with the hero party staring upward in terror at Fenrir. The massive beast fixes its glare on them, dismissing them in its mind as insignificant intruders creating noise. Saliva drips from its open jaws as it prepares to devour them. Vivia trembles, recognizing the creature as the hellhound Fenrir and wondering if this is where everything ends. He recalls that Fenrir is supposed to be a floor 99 boss and questions why it has appeared on this level. Palala squeaks in fear, knowing that even S-rank adventurers struggle against such a monster. She urges the group to flee, but Vivia stops her, warning that acting carelessly would guarantee their deaths. Grinding his teeth in frustration, he curses their situation. Their former party would have had the strength to confront Fenrir, but in their current state, escape is their only option, though even that will be difficult against this foe. Determined, Vivia decides they need a decoy. He looks at Alicia, noting that she is an S-rank adventurer like him and essential because of her healing abilities. Elga can still be used as a shield, and Delia will be needed once her injuries finish healing. With this calculation in mind, he turns toward Palala, who is still trying to insist they escape quickly. Before she can finish, Vivia strikes her in the stomach, causing her to collapse with a pained groan. Delia calls out to him as he rummages through Palala's belongings, while Elga angrily demands to know what he is doing. Ignoring them, Vivia takes several vials from Palala, accusing her of hiding resources. He claims he will use them for their escape. Elga retorts that this is no moment to abandon an ally, but Vivia shouts back, insisting they are going to find help and that this is their only viable action. When Elga questions whether they are simply leaving Palala behind, Palala, gasping, looks up in pain. Vivia asserts that they are not abandoning her, arguing that she has exhausted her magic and the others will survive better without her. If they fail to escape, he reasons, there will be no chance of rescue. Palala weakly calls his name, but before she can continue, Delia unexpectedly agrees with Vivia, stating that seeking help is necessary. Palala stares at her in disbelief, unable to accept Delia's stance. Vivia quietly leans into Palala and tells her to endure until help arrives, though inwardly he smirks, planning to let her buy them time until she dies. Vivia turns to Alicia and tells her they are leaving, but Alicia does not respond immediately. After a moment, she refuses, declaring that she will stop Fenrir herself. She begins casting a spell. Vivia, stunned, questions her actions, but Alicia completes a barrier spell that encloses herself and Palala, cutting them off from the others. She urges the rest of the group to go. Seeing the barrier, Vivia sweats as acknowledging her decision and telling her to hold out until help arrives. As he flees, he curses inwardly that even the Saintess could have been useful to him, but escaping takes priority. Sacrificing the two behind him is, in his mind, an acceptable price for survival. As he continues running, Delia calls out to him to wait, while Elga clicks his tongue in frustration before both eventually begin fleeing as well. Palala cries out after the fleeing party, demanding that they stop and questioning whether they are truly abandoning her. Alicia begins preparing an attack spell while Palala strikes desperately against the magic barrier, insisting that they are supposed to be allies. Furious and betrayed, she unleashes curses, swearing twice and vowing never to forgive them, proclaiming she will curse them all to death. Fenrir steps closer to Palala and questions whether she genuinely believes she has the time to cast such curses, causing her to recoil in fear. Alicia comments that Fenrir makes curses sound easy, and Fenrir responds with a rough grunt, stating that curses are indeed simple for him. Alicia, pouting, remarks that this situation is unfortunate, yet she finds herself unable to feel motivated without a certain person present. Palala screams at her in disbelief, demanding to know how she can stand there and talk so casually, and insisting that she does not want to die. She urges Alicia to do something, but Alicia abruptly silences her, causing Palala to flinch again. Alicia tells her to be quiet and to focus on her fear, stating confidently that she has no intention of dying today. Fenrir tilts his head, noting the determination in Alicia's eyes. He wonders aloud whether it is the desire for revenge against her cowardly companions that drives her, or whether she believes she is destined to save the world. Alicia repeats his suggestions: revenge, saving the world, and dismisses them both, declaring that she cares nothing for such things. Fenrir narrows his eyes at her. Alicia states that she has only one reason for fighting. Her eyes sparkle as she passionately declares that she merely wants to see Ariake again and shower him with affection. Both Palala and Fenrir utter sounds of confusion. Palala questions the meaning of this declaration, unable to understand Alicia's sudden romantic behavior. Alicia fidgets, cheeks reddened, telling Palala not to make her say too much. Her heart pounding, she announces that Ariake is her beloved, and she proclaims him to be the world's one true hero. Palala bursts out in shock, unable to comprehend how someone she believes to be a useless, skill-less fool could possibly hold such a status. Alicia immediately raises her staff toward Palala, offended by her insult and reprimanding her rudeness. Alicia begins explaining to Palala that her assumption about Ariake lacking a unique skill is wrong. Palala stutters in confusion, insisting that this was what the appraiser had concluded. Alicia replies that, in her view, Ariake's very existence is a unique skill in itself. Fenrir watches the exchange silently, prompting Alicia to turn toward him and apologize before politely asking if he could allow them a few moments to continue their discussion. Palala calls out to her in disbelief. Fenrir responds that he does not mind, finding the situation quite interesting, which leaves Palala stunned. Alicia thanks Fenrir and resumes her explanation. She tells Palala that she searched through tomes all across the land, and one answer stood out among them: the god of buffs. She believes this is Ariake's true unique skill. Palala repeats the term in confusion, Alicia cheerfully states that she will speak with Fenrir again soon and plans to find a spacious, secluded location where she can perform the resurrection. Before falling asleep, Fenrir corrects Alicia on a misunderstanding. She is female, and she possesses the ability to take human form if she is ever able to walk outside again as Alicia's equal. Alicia is shocked to discover that Fenrir is a girl who can transform into a human. She tries to shake Fenrir awake, but realizes she has already fallen asleep. Flustered, she worries aloud that this may be trouble. She hopes Fenrir will not be an attractive girl, fearing the complications if she meets Ariake, yet she also wants to proudly show him that she succeeded in making Fenrir her familiar. Despite her nerves, she convinces herself that everything will work out and feels that her opportunity has finally arrived. Several hours later, Alicia returns to their base and informs Vivia and the rest of the group that she is leaving the party. Vivia expresses relief that Alicia returned alive and tells her she does not need to leave the party. Alicia insists that she can no longer fight. In her thoughts, she recognizes that this incident finally gives her the excuse she needed to leave. As the great saintess, she could not simply walk away under normal circumstances, but now she sees her chance. She believes it will take time to recover from her battle with Fenrir, leaving her with no choice but to step away. To her, this situation is the perfect justification. Alicia notices Palala resting nearby and wonders internally how Palala managed to escape as well. Elga acknowledges Alicia's decision but admits he wished she could stay for their next quest. Alicia asks what he means by next quest, and Elga informs her that they received a letter directly from the kingdom. Alicia reads the letter, stating that Vuvua Haranoa is to be punished by order of the kingdom's council. He is to forfeit the holy sword Langris, and in order to do so, the party must first complete a D-rank quest. Vivia reacts with disbelief, convinced that the decision is nothing more than a bluff, noting that she has run out of materials related to him. Although her return took longer than expected, she is now on her way back to him. She clutches her Ariake doll and declares her intention to stay by his side forever. Soon after Alicia's departure, Ariake saves the town of Medicine. He still remains unaware of the punishment imposed on the hero's party. At present, he has entered the Forest of Abundance. Colette marvels at its vast, beautiful expanse and expresses confusion at the sight before them. Blocking their path is a group of elves aiming their drawn bows at the carriage. Colette asks Ariake what they should do. Ariake considers their options as a new trial begins. The elves blocked Ariake's path, identifying him as Mahama Ariake. They introduced themselves as the proud guardians of the forest and stated that High Lord Hayes sought an audience with him. They ordered him to follow them quietly, warning that they could not ensure his safety if he resisted. At the leader's signal, the elves aimed their bows at him. Ariaki noted to himself that this was a harsh way to treat visitors and questioned what would happen if he refused to comply. The elves declared that he would be taken by force, and arrows were released in his direction. Colette immediately intervened, breathing fire that burned the elves' bows and arrows. With a wicked grin, she expressed her fury that they had dared to point weapons at her master and warned that she still had more flames to unleash. Ariaki stopped her, insisting that further action was unnecessary. He apologized to the elves for Colette burning their weapons and wondered what he could have done to provoke such hostility, since nothing came to mind. The leader dismissed his confusion, ordering him to be silent and labeling him a seed of calamity. She commanded her group to pull Ariaki and Colette from their carriage, and the elves rushed toward them. Ariaki responded with overwhelming physical force, using an iron fist to repel them. The leader recoiled in shock at his superhuman strength and questioned how much more damage he and the fire breather intended to inflict on the forest. Ariaki demanded clarification about this calamity accusation. The leader refused to explain further, shouting that he had left them no choice and that they had a duty to protect the forest. The elves raised their hands, and a powerful wind surged forth. Ariaki and Colette braced themselves as the wind intensified into the Wind Lord's barrier. The elves proclaimed that this was their strongest protective spell, warning that any attempt to escape would result in being torn apart. They declared that if Ariaki and Colette wished to live, they must kneel and surrender. Colette asked Ariaki whether she should blow the barrier away with her flames of love, but Ariaki refused. He explained that such an action would harm not only the forest but also the elf. He urged her to wait, but Colette was frustrated, finding it unreasonable to remain patient while they were being attacked so aggressively. Ariaki maintained that something was off about their behavior. He noted that the elves seemed driven into a corner, their eyes bloodshot and their bodies exhausted, an abnormal state for elves. He considered allowing himself to be captured, but decided the elves were too unstable to listen. Instead, he chose to demonstrate that he had no intention of fighting. Reaching into the wind barrier, he immediately suffered deep lacerations as the slicing winds tore into him. His body was slashed repeatedly, soon covered in blood. The elves gasped in shock at the sight. The leader elf rushed toward Ariaki, urgently ordering the others to cease their chanting. She approached him with visible anxiety, checking whether he was still alive and remarking that he had knowingly hurled himself into certain death. Ariaki attempted to stand, explaining with difficulty that it was hard to adjust his own enhancements so that he would still incur injuries. He reassured her not to worry, insisting that he had buffed himself just enough to survive. The leader elf could not comprehend how he could speak so casually while blood streamed from his wounds. Behind him, Colette hurried to assist, scolding him for being far too reckless. Ariaki maintained that he hoped the elves now understood he had no intent to battle them. With that settled, he asked whether they would finally discuss the so-called calamity that had befallen their proud people. The leader elf groaned in frustration. At that moment, another elf arrived, demanding to know what the leader was doing. Recognizing Ariaki and Colette, the newcomer ordered the elves to halt their attacks immediately. The leader elf was stunned to see that the newcomer was Princess Sela. Confused, she questioned why the princess had come. Princess Sela lowered herself respectfully before Ariaki and Colette, introducing herself as the younger sister of the Elven High Lord. She apologized for how rudely her people had acted, explaining that their devotion to the forest and adherence to tradition had clouded their judgment. She pleaded for Ariaki's forgiveness. Ariaki responded that he did not hold a grudge. The leader elf tried to stop the princess, insisting that it was shameful for her to bow to a human. But the princess commanded her to remain silent. She went on to state that Ariaki the Wise and Lady Colette were heroes who had saved the town of Medicen from the monster horde. She asked whether the elves had not heard the reports. The leader elf admitted that she did not trust rumors. Meanwhile, Colette whispered excitedly to Ariaki that she was becoming famous as well, blushing at the thought. Ariaki expressed surprise that even the isolated elves had learned of their deed. Princess Sela then explained that she herself had witnessed their actions with her own eyes. The elves stared at the princess in confusion as she recalled the event. She stated she would never forget the moment when, as an orc was closing in to take her life, Ariaki charged forward to save her. Both Ariaki and Colette gave her a puzzled look until Ariaki realized who she was, recognizing her as the elven adventurer he had encountered previously. The princess confirmed this with amusement. Colette reacted in disbelief, while Princess Sela explained that she had grown quite skilled at disguising herself after repeatedly sneaking out of the forest. Hearing this, the leader elf immediately reacted, shocked that the princess had left the forest without permission yet again. Ariake muttered about her recklessness, prompting the leader elf to glare and begin expressing her gratitude reluctantly, only to be interrupted by Prince Sela, who insisted they must properly show their thanks and apologize by escorting Ariake and Colette to the elven village. The leader elf protested, insisting that Ariake and Colette were a source of calamity and should not be allowed to enter. But the princess fixed her with a sharp look and reminded her that Ariake had saved her life, yet the leader had responded by injuring him and attempting to drive him away. Forced to relent, the leader elf agreed to treat him with at least basic respect. Colette reacted with excitement at the prospect of visiting an elven village. The princess told Ariake she would guide him personally, while the nearby elves whispered among themselves anxiously. The leader elf instructed another elf to immediately inform High Lord Hayes that the Seed of Calamity was on his way to the village. As Ariake and Colette approached the settlement, Colette marveled at its beauty. Ariake, however, noticed that elves were shutting their windows at the sight of them. When they reached the river, Colette was surprised to see it filled with floating logs. Princess Sela explained that these were trees that had dried up and fallen, drifting downstream. Colette noted how many there were. The princess told them they would rest at her home for now. Later, Princess Sela served them a delicious meal, encouraging them to eat as much as they liked. Colette devoured her portion happily. The princess expressed her joy that they enjoyed the food. Ariake remarked that he never expected to taste the cooking of the elven princess herself. Sela told him that serving them was her way of showing gratitude, and she invited him to simply call her by her name. She blushed at the gesture. Ariake then asked why he was being referred to as the Seed of Calamity and what had happened to the forest. The princess lowered her gaze and explained that everything began a year ago. One by one, the trees of the Forest of Abundance began to wither. Colette asked if she meant the logs in the river. Looking outside, Sela confirmed it. She added that the calamity's effects were far worse deeper within the forest. She opened a window and pointed toward the center, where a dark, sinister aura emanated. The sky above that area, once bright, had turned ominously dark. Colette commented on how foreboding the cloud looked. Ariake observed that its source appeared magical in nature, pulsing with malevolent intent, and concluded that it was likely only a matter of time before monsters emerged from it. The princess confirmed that the forest trees, which had once formed a protective boundary, had all begun to wither, leaving the forest in a fragile state. If the forest died, so too would its people. Colette remarked that this had nothing to do with Ariake, and the princess agreed, though she explained that her brother had reached a different conclusion. He believed there was only one explanation: Ariake's mere presence was a calamity. Ariake asked whether this judgment had anything to do with a pact between the heroes and the elves, and Colette inquired about the details of this pact. Ariake explained that long ago, the heroes of old had promised to protect the elves and their forest under divine blessings. Despite their distrust of humans, the elves allowed heroes to travel freely through their lands, including Vivia. Ariake himself had been expelled from the heroes' party because they considered him a burden, and he guessed that the elves similarly regarded him as a liability. He understood that anyone entering the forest without the blessing of the heroes was believed to bring disaster, and the princess confirmed this. Colette objected, pointing out the unfairness, since Ariake had left the party long after the calamity had begun. The princess acknowledged that although Ariake's intent was to protect the forest, her brother could no longer discern right from wrong and mistakenly considered Ariake responsible. In reality, he was the forest's savior. The princess bowed deeply, acknowledging her own selfishness, and requested that Ariake save the forest just as he had protected the town of Medicine. Suddenly, the doors of the room slammed open, and her brother, Hayes, appeared. He was furious that the princess had dared to invite Ariake, the so-called Seed of Calamity, into their forest. Before she could defend her actions, handcuffs were fastened around her wrists, taking her by surprise. Hayes condemned her for addressing Ariake with respect, declaring her a disgrace and ordering that she be imprisoned until she regained her senses. The princess sniffled in distress. Without hesitation, Ariake snapped the handcuffs apart. He remarked that while he hated to interrupt a family confrontation, Hayes's attention was directed at him, not her, and suggested that the siblings leave their argument aside for now. Ariake shattered the handcuffs, crumbling the pieces onto the floor. Hayes was stunned, glaring at him in disbelief, unable to comprehend what he had done. Ariake stepped on the broken metal, declaring that the princess would no longer need them. The so-called calamity Hayes had been fearing stood right before him. Suddenly, Hayes grabbed Ariake by the collar and slammed him onto a table. The two girls watched in shock as Hayes fumed, seething at Ariake's arrogance for daring to enter the village despite being expelled from the heroes' party. Before he could continue his tirade, a chilling voice cut through the room. Colette had stepped forward, radiating pure fury. Ariake urged her to calm down, insisting that he was fine. Colette, however, was incensed, furious that Hayes had even ruined Sella's home-cooked meal. Hayes's mind reeled under the oppressive weight of Colette's wrath. He felt paralyzed by a sense of terror far greater than mere fear, though rationally, he knew he had no reason to be afraid. Ariake was merely an incompetent human, and capturing him should have been enough to stop the forest from withering. Nonetheless, panic overtook him. He ordered the other elves to apprehend Ariake and Colette, eventually locking them in a cell and sealing it with magic. The elves barged in to enforce the capture, but Colette told Ariake that it was time to act. Ariake looked around, assessing the situation, and the princess called to them from a window, guiding them toward escape. They leapt from the window, landing on the ground below. Colette remarked on the princess's skill, and the princess chuckled, noting that her frequent adventuring had made her agile. Ariake observed that there were more weaknesses in the village's defenses than he had anticipated. The princess instructed them to follow her and leave immediately. Suddenly, a loud explosion resounded. A violent gust of wind surged around them, and the princess called to Ariake and Colette. Hayes appeared, furious that the siblings were attempting to flee. Originally, he had intended to capture Ariake alive to uncover the cause of the forest's withering, but now his rage boiled over, and he resolved to show no mercy. He uprooted trees and unleashed his most powerful barrier, a swirling wind so potent it was less a shield than an offensive attack, vowing to destroy the calamity that was Ariake. The whirling wind tore through the area, accompanied by the sound of slicing air. The princess looked up in horror, fearing the worst for Ariake and Colette. When the wind finally subsided, they were gone. Hayes muttered to himself, assuming Ariake had merely bluffed, yet a voice behind him warned him not to get ahead of himself. Ariake and Colette had survived. Hayes was stunned, unable to comprehend how they were still alive. Ariake revealed that he had used a decoy skill to create a clone that acted as a distraction, while Colette explained that they had used her master's stealth abilities to approach undetected from behind. Previously, Ariake had endured the barrier's attack to negotiate afterward, but this time he used the decoy to eliminate the threat entirely. Hayes could hardly believe what had occurred. Ariake then told Hayes that he would comply, taking a spot in the jail as Hayes had demanded. Hayes had wanted to capture Ariake to stop the forest from withering, and Ariake agreed to facilitate this plan. Hayes lamented that it was unfortunate Ariake was still alive, but he restrained him with handcuffs anyway. Colette questioned the decision, and Ariake explained that it would make communication with Hayes easier. Ariake asked Hayes whether the forest's withering would cease now that he was imprisoned. Hayes confirmed that it would, explaining that the cells reflected all magic used within, making interference with the outside world impossible. Once Ariake was locked away, the calamity should subside. Ariake advised Hayes to observe for himself and draw his own conclusions rather than relying on rumors. Hayes instructed Ariake not to speak, asserting control as if Ariake were beneath him. He commanded his elves to take Ariake and Colette away, and they complied without question. Later, deep within the forest, they arrived at a prison shaped like an egg, suspended in midair. Colette was taken aback by the floating structure, while Ariake marveled at the sophistication of elven magic. Excited to explore the interior, he urged Colette to move forward. Colette, skeptical, noted that it did not feel like a prison, but she nonetheless held onto the bars as they entered. An elf reported to Hayes that Ariake, the so-called Calamity, had been securely imprisoned. Satisfied, Hayes dismissed the elves and allowed them to retire. Colette was surprised to find Princess Sella inside the same cell, who explained that she had attempted to aid Ariake and Colette's escape. Allowing her to remain free alone would have caused bad publicity. Colette acknowledged this, apologizing for involving the princess, but Sella insisted she was happy to spend her life with Ariake. Colette understood this and realized she could not waste time attempting a breakout. Ariake warned that the cell nullified physical attacks, surprising Colette with his insight. He explained that he could discern the type of magic being used and advised against testing it, as doing so would only make matters more difficult. Colette questioned whether magical attacks could be used instead, suggesting that Ariake invert the prison's energy absorption to his advantage. Ariake assessed the prison and noted that it could no longer accommodate more magical energy without collapsing. Sella, astonished, had never encountered such a magical structure before. Colette praised Ariake, but he insisted that they wait, believing that patience was the key to resolving their predicament. A week later, Hayes surveyed the forest and was shocked at the destruction. Countless trees had withered and animals had perished. The elves whispered in horror, noting that the forest was consumed by malice. Though rain had delayed the spread for a day, the devastation made them question whether capturing Ariake had truly been wise. Hayes demanded that they dispose of the rot and purify the forest immediately, warning that if the corruption spread further, the malice would intensify. He ordered the royal guard to reinforce the barrier and follow him. Internally, he cursed himself. It had been a week since Ariake's capture, yet there was no sign of recovery. Hayes reflected on his tenure as High Lord. Blessed by the forest spirit, he had devoted himself to enriching the forest of abundance. In the decade of his leadership, no calamity like this had occurred. In fact, the forest had thrived due to a reduction in logging, empowering the elves and strengthening their people. But in the past year, unprecedented withering had begun. Hayes recalled being warned that if the forest rejected him, he was unfit to rule. He knew this was not true. The forest had accepted him until now. Clearly, another force was responsible. No matter the number of skills or measures required, Hayes vowed to uncover the true cause behind the corruption. One of the elves asked Hayes if he had heard about the recent events involving the Heroes Party. He inquired further, and the elf informed him that the party had expelled one of its members. At that moment, Hayes recalled that years ago he had met the Heroes Party, though Ariake had not been present at the time, so they had never crossed paths. Reflecting on this, Hayes remembered how incompetent the hero was said to be back then. Convinced that Ariake was exacting revenge for being abandoned by the hero, Hayes concluded that this was the cause of the forest's withering. He was certain Ariake was a calamity. Hayes recalled Ariake's earlier words, warning him not to look away and to come to his own conclusions. Gasping for breath, Hayes remembered his sister defending Ariake. Suddenly, a whirling wind erupted, forcing them to retreat swiftly on their horses. Hayes's expression turned serious. Meanwhile, in the prison cells, Colette expressed her frustration to Ariake that an entire week had passed. Ariake assured her that time would resolve everything, though it seemed too long already. Sela apologized for the events that had transpired, but Colette remained confident that she would survive. Ariake's innocence was gradually being recognized. Sela noted that she had been freed within a single day, highlighting her brother's stubborn overprotectiveness. She reflected on how Hayes had always treated her more like a child than a sister due to their age difference. Though strict with the elves, Hayes cared deeply for the forest, wishing desperately for the withering to cease and for his people to avoid further suffering. Ariake reassured Colette that there was no need to worry. Hayes had likely begun to realize that the illusion of a calamity he had believed in was of his own making. With that illusion removed, he could finally perceive the true state of the forest. The forest was now testing him as its High Lord, and Ariake was patiently waiting for this realization. Sela's eyes widened, sensing that it was as though Lord Ariake himself were testing them, a god descending upon them from the heavens. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the area, sending tremors through the forest. Another rumble followed. Ariake recognized the danger immediately, noting that the timing could not have been worse. The anomaly in the forest continued to grow, signaling a new and escalating threat. Chapter 15 begins with Hayes riding his horse, spotting smoke rising in the distance. Alarmed, he urges his people to move quickly, realizing it is an emergency distress signal from the village. As he approaches, he is struck with fear and shock. The village has been ravaged, buried under mud and fallen trees, and his people are desperately fleeing to safety. The destruction overwhelms him, and he struggles to comprehend how such a catastrophe could occur. A soldier reassures him of his safety and explains that a landslide has engulfed much of the village, burying many homes. Hayes anxiously inquires about the villagers, learning that rescue efforts are underway but limited by insufficient manpower. Panic spreads through the crowd, and Hayes's thoughts immediately turn to Sela, whom they have yet to find. The urgency of the situation grows when an elf informs him that a baby is trapped beneath the rubble, prompting immediate action. Despite the danger, villagers plead for him to give evacuation orders as the risk of another landslide looms. Hayes is torn between saving those trapped and ensuring the safety of others, while dark thoughts of failure creep into his mind. He blames himself, feeling rejected by the forest spirit. Recalling Ariake's words to face reality with his own eyes, he realizes that surrender is not an option. Accepting his role as the village leader, Hayes resolves that no one will be abandoned. Rescue of their fellow villagers becomes the highest priority, with soldiers instructed to clear homes and evacuate the elderly and children first. Hayes witnesses the villagers working together and sets aside concerns about the spirits, focusing on saving lives. He rescues the baby trapped under debris, holding her tightly, when a sudden landslide erupts nearby. Panic surges as he realizes the magnitude of the danger, and he contemplates using his strongest magic to stop it. Yet he recognizes that even his power is insufficient to halt the overwhelming force. Apologizing silently to the villagers and to Sela, Hayes prepares to face the disaster. At that moment, Ariake appears and questions why he is giving up. Hayes opened his eyes fully when he realized who had spoken. Looking up, he saw Ariake standing before him. Ariake immediately began casting a spell toward the incoming landslide, combining time stop, gravity manipulation, and force repulsion. He synthesized the skills and sustained them continuously. As the spell took effect, the massive flow of earth and debris gradually slowed until it stopped entirely. Hayes gasped as the landslide began to recede, and the surrounding villagers cried out in astonishment, calling it a miracle. After some time, the atmosphere shifted into relief and celebration. The villagers rejoiced, shouting that they were saved and still alive. Hayes returned a baby to her mother, who tearfully thanked him for rescuing her child. Observing the devastation around them, Hayes questioned Ariake, stunned by the number of skills he had activated at such a large scale and wondering what he truly was. Ariake prepared to respond, but Sela arrived, exhausted and breathless, demanding to know what had happened. Hayes rushed to her side to confirm her safety, relieved when she reassured him. With tears forming in her eyes, she called out to him, but he insisted that explanations could wait, as rescuing those still trapped was the priority. Sela resolved to help as well. Colette arrived soon after, stomping in frustration at being left behind. Because Sela had been slow, she had carried her the entire way. Ariake thanked her, and Colette noted that she had wondered why he had broken out and run ahead, only to discover that he had already resolved the crisis. Ariake insisted that the landslide had been headed directly for him and that he had only protected himself, claiming he had not saved anything. Hayes rejected that notion, declaring that Ariake had unquestionably saved their village. He stated that once the rescue was complete, the entire village would express their gratitude. Sela called out to her brother warmly, and Ariake smiled, telling Hayes he would look forward to that. He then pointed out their limitation, questioning how many days it would take to clear the massive sediment. Embarrassed, Hayes told him to be quiet, insisting that it was not the time to worry about such things. In response, Ariake cast a spell on Hayes and the nearby villagers, maximizing their muscle enhancement. Hayes began to glow, stunned by the sudden surge of power. A villager effortlessly lifted a massive boulder, marveling at his newfound strength. Ariake explained that he had ensured everyone present received the enhancement, urging them to hurry and finish clearing the debris since he was in a rush. Hayes and Sela could only stare at him in disbelief, overwhelmed by what he had just done. A few days after the landslide disaster, Ariake and Colette stood on a stage as villagers celebrated their savior, Lord Ariake. The villagers, alongside Colette, cheered for him, while Ariake lingered behind, sulking. They praised his skill and strategic thinking, marveling at the miracle that no one had perished, expressing gratitude for his actions. Meanwhile, Sela thanked Ariake for his heroism, recognizing him as a once-in-a-generation hero. She questioned why he was leaving as she watched him attempt to slip away unnoticed. Ariake explained that he stood out too much and intended to hide in a corner. However, Hayes blocked his path, warning that he would be responsible if their savior were sidelined, which caused Ariake to flinch. Hayes instructed him to return to his seat. While eating, Ariake remarked that he did not mind being observed from the corner and told Hayes to stop being overly formal. Hayes struck the table, drawing the villagers' attention. Sela called out to him, prompting Hayes to hesitate before attempting to apologize for his prior rudeness. He struggled to voice the apology, quivering under the weight of the moment, while Colette encouraged him to speak. Ariake reassured Hayes that apologizing was difficult for elves toward humans, and that he should not strain himself. Hayes slammed the table again, then bowed deeply, finally shouting his apology. In that moment, Hayes realized he had unfairly blamed Ariake for his people's hardship. His overprotectiveness and mistrust had endangered his own people, and he acknowledged his mistakes, including mistrusting his sister and himself. Ariake finally addressed him, explaining that the landslide had been caused not by Ariake, but by the accumulation of malice, which stemmed from Hayes's overprotectiveness of the forest. Hayes, shocked, asked for clarification, seeking to understand what Ariake meant. Ariake explained to Hayes that Sela had told him the forest's history while they were imprisoned. Until a few years ago, the forest had been thinned regularly, but Hayes had stopped that practice. Hayes confirmed this, questioning its relevance, but Ariake pointed out that ever since their arrival, He had been concerned about the unusually high density of trees. In an elven forest, each tree must be properly pruned, but Hayes' decision left too many trees uncared for. The excessive density blocked sunlight, allowing malice to accumulate. Sella speculated that the heavy rain may have contributed to the landslide, and Ariake agreed, noting that the malice likely caused the storms. He then reproached Hayes, saying that as High Lord, he should have anticipated the consequences of abruptly halting the forest thinning. Hayes recalled that years ago, someone had advised him to stop, and Ariake asked who would give such irresponsible counsel. Hayes revealed it had been the hero, Lord Vivia, surprising both Colette and Ariake. Hayes recounted that Vivia had questioned the old tree-thinning tradition, arguing that elves derived their power from the trees and should let them grow, while dismissing his own advice as inconsequential. At the time, Hayes, despite skepticism, had followed Vivia's suggestion, which temporarily ended the disasters and allowed the forest's power to flourish. Ariake pointed out that the flourishing was only temporary. Colette added that by the time Hayes realized the forest was deteriorating, it was too late, venting frustration at Vivia's incompetence. Hayes acknowledged his own failure in not recognizing the underlying cause, admitting that his inexperience made him overconfident in finding a new solution. Ariake, overwhelmed, declared that none of the calamities would have occurred if he had consulted Vivia earlier, even if it meant splitting their paths. Colette remarked that Ariake was slipping into dad mode. Taking responsibility, Ariake apologized, leaving Hayes and Sella astonished. Despite having been banished from their party, he still expressed remorse. Hayes reflected on the meaning of apologies, realizing that Ariake still held his pride intact. Kneeling beside him, Hayes thanked Ariake, acknowledging his wisdom, and resolved to thin the forest and purge it of malice. It was time for both the forest and himself to start anew. A few days later, Sella was overcome with emotion, tearfully expressing her desire for Ariake to stay, even joking about starting a fan club. Hayes, however, reminded her that it was time for them to depart. Despite her continued crying, Colette offered to help, but Ariake quickly discouraged her from encouraging Sella's sentiment. Hayes informed Ariake that once everything was settled, he would send a report to the kingdom, holding them accountable for the actions of the heroes they recognized. He believed it prudent to warn Lord Vivia about his naivety. Ariake considered this and acknowledged that Hayes had a point, though he was flustered when Hayes added that he would also report Ariake's heroic deeds. Turning to Sella, Hayes asked how long she planned to cry. Sella looked at Ariake, attempting to communicate something, and he encouraged her to continue. He expressed confidence in her ability to save her people, affirming that she would become a great leader. Colette noted that Sella's presence had been crucial during their time in captivity. Ariake assured her that she possessed all the qualities necessary for leadership and predicted that when they met again, she would have guided her people to greater heights as their princess. He bade her to take care, and Sella, still tearful, promised she would, wishing for Ariake's safety as well. Colette and Ariake then departed, leaving Hayes and Sella waving after them. Meanwhile, in Lakshmi City, a girl was seen reading a notice on the guild wall about the heroes' party recruiting new members. Excited, she recognized this as her chance to prove her worth. At the same time, the heroes' party had indeed begun recruiting new members.
Remedy Entertainment, a company that is mostly known today for having given us a perfect rendition of how modern-day Nordic god will behave today, and of course the Lovecraftian and absolutely insane powers of a janitor called Ati. This motherfucker can read your mind. Today we mostly know them for the connected universe that have created through games like Alan Wake, Quantum Break, Alan Wake 2, and of course Control. But before that time they made a game that quite literally revolutionized the genre of third-person shooter, Max Payne, and its sequel. Now, I will set this recommendation here of a video by content creator Alex Webb, whom I know from his amazing comic book videos, sometimes even about comic book video games. But, well, technically speaking, Max Payne does have a comic book in the game, so I guess it kind of makes sense that he would cover a game like this. But anyways, this one is on Max Payne 3, which was made by Rockstar. A good game, in my opinion, but somewhat of a bit of a fumble. It hasn't exactly survived the crushing monetary demands of Rockstar as its predecessors in the gaming industry. But it is a visually striking one that I actually very much love, and I have Hold on a minute. Max Payne 3, I don't have it installed. I've spent 71.9 hours playing through it. And I haven't even unlocked all the achievements. This has just been me going through all of the thing and collecting the golden guns. And damn, it's been 2 years. I need to play it again. Sorry for the tangent. Let's get into the video.
Excuse me for one moment. I need to set the mood. Ah, finally.
Yeah.
Music. The Max Payne series has been dormant for around 12 years now, which is kinda surprising considering how influential these games have been for third-person shooters. Starring titular character Max Payne, the original depressed violent man, and a very long line of depressed violent men, the series follows Max's descent into the criminal underworld after the brutal murders of his wife and child, investigating a mysterious new designer drug known as Valkyrie. So, with a premise like that, you'd probably think these games would be incredibly dark, and while they don't hold back in showing some awful stuff, Max Payne still maintains a great sense of humor.
I'm not gonna be anybody's fall guy.
Wow.
Well, at least the first two games did anyway. Max Payne 3 kinda skipped the comedy part in favor of Max being even more depressed.
Headed straight for liver damage.
See, I've been wanting to talk about this game for years now, but I've never really figured out how to tackle it. I mean, it is a brutal game that dives headfirst into the most depraved kinds of people imaginable.
I mean, I agree, you know. You got me.
All while Max ingests his entire body weight in pills and alcohol, and obviously showing any of that on my channel may cause YouTube to terminate my existence. But before we get into Max Payne 3, I think it's probably a good idea to look at how exactly we ended up here in the first place. Developed by Finnish game company Remedy Entertainment, the original concept for Max Payne started in the late 90s when Remedy began work on a third-person action game similar to Tomb Raider, which at the time was super successful. Firstly, the game of course needed a story, so Remedy looked to the writer they previously hired for their debut game Death Rally, the writer in question being university student Sam
Lake.
Wow, I think I've seen that face before. Sam was put in charge of writing the story and screenplay for Max Payne, and his main goal was to tell a much deeper story within the context of an action game.
What a good writer, man. Sam Lake has done such an amazing job in everything. Like, I know that not every single time or everybody's going to agree with the structure of his storytelling.
Oh God, Sheriff Tim Breaker. Tim E. Breaker. You hack.
Especially not within the confines of Alan Wake, for example. But you can't argue just how good this man is at writing. He's amazing.
Thing that hadn't really been done up until now.
Don't have time to play with myself.
You like men. My fucking God.
This bitch is gay. Good for them. Good for them.
Good for them.
He started off with this archetype of a hard-boiled New York cop, and from there developed a darkly complex crime noir story with elements of Norse mythology thrown in for good measure. Hey, look, it's Ragnarok from the funny Marvel movie. Gameplay-wise, game lead Petri Jovelito was a big fan of Hong Kong action movies and envisioned the gameplay for Max Payne to emulate the feeling of watching a John Woo movie, introducing the concept of bullet time into the game. It's also probably worth noting that Max Payne was well into development before The Matrix came out and popularized the whole slow-mo bullet time thing, with the game's initial release being 1999. So no, Max Payne didn't copy The Matrix. Unfortunately though, the game was heavily delayed as Remedy wanted to improve the game's graphics with more realistic features. Although, with that being said, why does Max's face look like this? If you couldn't already tell, Max Payne was modelled after Sam Lake himself, as he played the role during the graphic novel-inspired cutscenes and also gifted us with this fucking face. Overall, the process to create the first game took around 5 years, as Remedy clearly went through excruciating detail to get everything right, even going as far to travel to New York City just to get an idea of what the environment was truly like. Eventually though, in 2001, Max Payne released to widespread critical acclaim, and undeniably redefined the third-person shooter, being the perfect mix of good writing, fantastic gameplay, and the ability to still keep the game fun despite its grim subject matter.
Hell yeah.
Pair all of that with an outstanding performance by the late James McCaffrey, and you have an award-winning game that still holds up 23 years later.
Oh, what a badass. Rest in peace, man. I'm gonna miss that voice.
I mean, you can even play it on your iPhone now. Clearly, Remedy's years of hard work and dedication paid off. The game was hugely successful, reportedly selling close to 3 million copies within its first year. But with all that success, it wouldn't be long before others wanted a piece of that Max Payne pie. Now, we all know who Rockstar is, the games company who nowadays is mostly known for making the Cowboy game or the Stealing Cars game. However, back in the early 2000s, Rockstar was a more obscure company, initially established in 1998 as part of Take-Two Interactive, who from there would publish several of the early GTA games, as well as other titles like Midnight Club Racing and The Italian Job. Anyway, when it comes
my
to Max
God.
Payne, Remedy
Oh my god. I forgot that was a thing.
outsourced the development of the console